No sound.
Okay, maybe it's in my end. Hello, and welcome to the Big Book Club, the second Big Book Club for 2023. This month, the last 2 months, we read War and Peace by Lev Tolstoy, and I read that along with Charlotte and Milena. Charlotte is kindly holding up because I left it upstairs. Yes, so if you don't know about the Big Book Club, I'm surprised you're here, but we read books over 500 pages, and the theme for the last 2 months was classics. So if you want to blame anyone for making you read a 1,200 page book, it's these two ladies, because I gave them a choice, and they chose War and Peace. So the next book that we are reading in May and June will be Possession by Byatt. Here it is. This one I actually have to hand, and I will be reading that with Kieran from KD Books. So if you can get your hands on that one, you can join us for the live show, which will be end of June, beginning of July time, depending on our schedules and things. So let me just post this to Instagram so people know that we're live. And yeah, so if you guys want to introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about yourself, your channel, and also what's your favourite big book, your favourite book over 500 pages. Charlotte, if you want to go first.
Hello, I am Charlotte. My channel is Queenie Reads. I mainly read history, non-fiction, historical fiction, and I've been flirting with a little bit of romance recently. And on a normal year, I would read a lot more classics. This has actually been the only classic book that I read this year, but I feel like it's got the content of about 4 classics. So
Yeah,
I think I'm getting there this year. And my favorite book that is over 500 pages, if you know me, you'll know the answer, is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which I adore. And I may or may not make comparisons to this book because they're similar length and similar epicness. So my brain is automatically going to make comparison.
Milena?
Yeah, hi, I'm Milena from the channel Milena Reads. I read mainly classics, historical fiction, basically what these two beautiful ladies read as well. My favorite big book, I think it has to be Middlemarch by George Eliot. And I was very conflicted because that was an option for this book club. And I was like, am I ready to reread it? And then everyone can read the amazing Middlemarch, but I'm not ready. So that's why I regrettably picked War and Peace.
Well, I actually did read Middlemarch in March as well.
Yeah.
So I was reading Middlemarch and War and Peace in the last 2 months, which will explain why I haven't read as many books recently. But if you guys who are watching, if you want to introduce yourself in the comments, let us know what your favourite big book is as well, and what you thought of War and Peace. What was your rating? If you do ratings, I don't do ratings, but let me know what you thought. And Charlotte, what was your? If you had to pitch War and Peace to someone, what would you say? What would make someone read?
As you can tell from the title, it is a book of 2 halves. Those halves being war and peace. There are peace bits, there are war bits. If you are like me and you hate anything that is to do with war and military history and let's talk strategy, you're gonna have a hard time with this book. But if you are like me and you like a little bit of gossip and scandal and people being a bit ridiculous, then the peace bits are going to be great for you, because that's what happened with me. With every time we were in like a dining room, I was just like, on a ball scene, I was just like, yes, this is where I belong. And every time we were out on the field fighting, I was just like, no. But yeah, book of 2 halves.
I'm sure we will discuss the war scenes later. But Milena, what did you think overall?
Oh, I'm glad you didn't ask me to pitch it, because I would just say don't bother. Yeah, I was quite disappointed by War and Peace. I'm glad I read it, mainly because I can eye roll at people who love it. No, I'm kidding, of course. No, but I knew that was a gamble whether or not I would like it. But I didn't really. I like the peace parts because it was like a little slice of Jane Austen in an overall boring book. So Yeah, it was a 3-star for me, and there were parts that I liked, but at no point was it worth all those pages. So,
I rated it a 3.5, because I
oh,
feel like there were moments in this where like that kind of like had that sparkle that I would want to make such a long book worth it. But as I said before, when half of your book is essays about fighting or just fighting in general, you're going to struggle with me. But yeah, and also the ending, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
Definitely.
I had not great feelings about. But yeah, there were some characters and some sections of this which I really enjoyed, and had such a good time with. So I didn't want to. Yeah, I can see like the brilliance that is in there, but there are too many like niggling things for it to be like a 4 or 5 star for me.
I think it sounds like I enjoyed it the most. More than both of you, and I would say up until the epilogue I was like, yeah, I quite like War and Peace, and then both of the epilogues, both of them made me so angry. Well, no, one made me so angry, and one I was like, do I have to wade through this? Is that necessary? Like, you've said all of this throughout the rest of the book. Anyway, we'll get there later. But yeah, the epilogues like really brought it down for me. But before the epilogue, I was like, overall I enjoyed it. So for me, what I think was interesting about this book was it's a book about war, and the peace sides of it was like a mirror, and showing you like the ways that society gets itself into lots of different pickles, basically. The issues are the same whether you are in a very masculinized world of war or the more feminized world of peace. And I enjoyed the ways that it was a look at that like moment in time, and ideas of like what it is to be Russian and nationality and also family and things like that. But I really don't like, if I wanted to read historical non-fiction, military history, then I would not pick up a novel. And so whilst I didn't hate the parts of war that were to do with the soldiers, like when Rostov went to the hospital to see Denisov or whatever, I thought that was really interesting. And different parts, like when Pierre was captured, all of that, I was on board for those.
Yes.
More the bits where it was just like, and historians may say this about Napoleon, where I was like, this is not necessary. What are we doing here? Like, I was like, by the end of him reading those parts, I was like, until I see a character's name I recognise that is not Kutuzov, then I'm not going to pay attention properly to this, because I can't. So I suppose if you've skim read like 20% of the book, does it really count as a book you like, you enjoyed? No, it was only towards the end. It wasn't that much of it that I skim read, but there was definitely points where I was like, cannot with this. But other parts of it I did enjoy, and I thought that the characters were really interesting until he ruined them all with the epilogue. I don't understand.
I didn't hate the first epilogue as much as other people did, because even though like no one comes off well, it was so juicy. And I was finally like, oh, attention is back. I fell asleep for 100 pages and I'm back. And then the second one was a monstrosity. Yeah.
So yeah, if anyone doesn't know, War and Peace, we follow 3 families during the Napoleonic Wars. I feel like I haven't actually talked about what the book is about at all, and we're 10 minutes in. But yes, it is follows 3 Russian families during the Napoleonic Wars, as they variously go off to fight Napoleon and are a part of Moscow and St. Petersburg society. And there are bits about like Orthodox Christianity, bits about the what do you call them? What does Pierre become? One of them.
Okay. Freemasons. Yeah.
Freemasons. It's about the Freemasons and about debt. And yes, it is more a slice of time book than like particular plot. I would say there's not really. There is stuff happening. Stuff happens. People die and like get married and stuff. There is stuff happening, but it's not like you need to follow the plot as you would with a plot-based novel. A novel I would consider plot-based. It's more like a philosophy and thoughts book than anything else, I would say. Okay, so what was your favourite part of the book then? You've mentioned the since we've been bashing on it for so long, what was your bit? You mentioned these parts. What was it specifically that you enjoyed?
in terms of part, I know I've brought it up a lot, both on our lives and in our messages. I was basically waiting for the bit that coincides with the musical.
Yeah, of
And
course.
predictably, that bit was my favourite bit. I was like,
Yeah.
oh yes, I see
So
why they turned this section. So, for those of you who are unaware, there is a section of this book which was adapted about 5 years ago into a musical called Natasha, Pierre, and the Great Comet of 1812, and it's all about the affair that Natasha strikes up with Anatole while she is technically engaged to Andre, and there's also like Pierre and his relationship woes with Helene, and his duel are also like brought into the story, and I love that section in the book because it is so juicy and scandal.
Yeah.
And everything's going wrong, and the emotions are high, and there is no fighting to be seen. And that section is like 80 pages, and it's really good.
God.
I really enjoy it. Which I don't know how much that speaks to me as a person, because it's a scenario I would not want to be in, but I like reading about it.
I mean, it's the juiciest part of the book. So, yeah.
Like I know what's going to happen, but I'm still like, oh. And also, what I love about obviously, this is about the book and not about the musical, but I feel like the musical, like a lot of it is like line by line dialogue from the book, which
Oh, really?
So even though it's like very weird, like morphing of lots of different genres of music, and it is a bit weird to watch, I feel like it is fairly faithful.
Oh, we have some bad Wi-Fi, but we can keep on talking about what we liked.
She was like, Charlotte's talking about the musical again. Go.
I'm really sorry, my Wi-Fi. I'm glad that you guys can keep going without me though, because I don't know.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a bit worried. Yeah, so you've explained everything about the musical.
Yes. Yes. But yeah, that was my favorite bit. Scandal,
Yeah.
relationships, shambles.
Yeah. I liked as well when it got just juicy and when the characters and the plot kind of came together, which are a few kind of fun moments. And I didn't really mind whether that was a war part or a peace part. I think there are a lot of interesting things with Pierre and Andre during war parts, but when he is imprisoned, Pierre and those kind of bits were interesting. And I don't mind the idea of Tolstoy not calling this a novel, and like I read a little bit of the appendices and he's talking about how it's not a novel, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretentious, but whatever. I don't mind that, but he went on and on and on about it. And if he had just done one page of just describing some historical events and went back to the characters, it would have been fine for me, but it felt so unnecessary. And maybe I'm trying to imagine how that would be like an enjoyable reading experience. But even though if I was able, which I'm not really, to see the value objectively, I cannot see really my enjoyment beyond those moments where the characters were in certain scraps. And of course, what you said, Charlotte, that's one of the best moments, which I loved.
I think the ball scene where Andre and Natasha meet again is quite a well done scene, where that she's gone in and she's like, you see so much of her character in that scene where she's like, she's about to go in this very like performative way where she's like excited to go to a ball, and she's like, I have to be this certain type of person at a ball, and that's how I have to display. But she got too excited, and so she just went in like naturally. And Tolstoy says that was better. But it also shows how young she is, which does make me feel uncomfortable. It shows her youth, and then no one's dancing with her, and then Pierre keeps his promise and dances with her, and then introduces her to Andre, and she they get swept up together. And I didn't, out of all the love stories, I didn't super believe the one with Andre and Natasha very much.
No, me neither.
Yeah, but because it just didn't feel like they knew each other. It felt like she was just swept up in the romance of her first ball. and he was like, he'd become so disillusioned with the army and everything that he longed for home. I think that the Rostovs kind of represent home and Russia in this book.
Yeah.
And if you look at like Nikolai and Natasha, they draw people to them who have such like unhappy home lives and unsettled feeling around life. Generally speaking, like Maria and Andrei and Pierre, they're all, and even Kuragin to an extent, although he just enjoys the fun of it, but like they're people who don't have a family, and we're so often in the Rostovs family home, and like we see how much they are connected to each other and see each other all the time, like even to the extent that at the very beginning both Nikolai and Natasha are like pretending to be in love with their cousins. Like they're so into family that they almost marry their own family. And so for Pierre, like I think Pierre even says something about like how she represents something to him more than herself that is about like,
Yeah, I definitely, that was something I noticed as well, that especially Andre does it kind of with Pierre more, that he doesn't fall in love with her as a person, but with the idea and the dream of her, which is, considering her age, is like very icky. But I would say like I like the romance, which I didn't really expect, but the one between Nikolai and Sonia, I really like that
Sonia.
one. No, not Sonia. Oh my gosh, sorry. No, I meant Maria.
Maria.
The one he actually marries. Like when they met, I was like, oh wait, is it happening? I would love this.
Yeah, the tension there was definitely the best of all of them. I think it felt like people like noticing each other in a romantic way for the first time in a way that the others haven't so much. And going back to Andre, it's so interesting that it feels like he's going to repeat mistakes again, because he was married to his first wife at the beginning of the book. He's married to this woman who's just got married to her, and he's like, I am disillusioned with this woman, and marriage is not what I thought, and now you're going to go and like pretend you've fallen in love with another person, but you've just fallen in love with the idea of her again. And so he seemed like he was repeating mistakes, and I think that kind of let you know that he was going to be tragic. Like there was no way Andre could survive this book, because he was so disillusioned with everything. He's disillusioned with war and he's disillusioned with peace. So like there's no room for him in this book. So he has to die. You're on mute.
I'm unmuted, sorry. I said that I found it an interesting perspective and that I hadn't thought about it that way.
Is there any moments of this book that like moved you emotionally? Did you see any of the losses emotionally, or
Maria realizing that her father's dying, that whole lead up, you know it's coming, but like that's been her entire life, and then what's left, and is it after that she has to like kind of escape from there quite quickly because war is
she does something I didn't really understand with the peasants. I don't really understand what was going on.
But it's just and I think that's why when she does get paired off, it's like somebody is, like you were saying, somebody is finally recognizing her when her entire life has been about her father and being so put upon. I think those chapters where her father is dying, and he hasn't always appreciated her because he doesn't seem to appreciate anybody. I was just that got me.
I think
go through that, but
I think Mario is a bit like pathetic, but not in a like I look down on her way, like in pathos, what kind of way. She's kind of there's something she's just so, the way she talks to herself, like when we were inside her head, I think we talked about this when we did the reading sprints, the way that she is so like cruel to herself because it's the only place she's ever known. Like she's the opposite of Pierre and Andre in a lot of ways, because she's as sheltered as the Rostovs. She's never gone anywhere, and she's even more sheltered than them to a certain extent, because at least people come to visit the Rostovs. No one's going to the Volkonsky's house. Like she's just on her own, and she's in this little, and like you say, she's never known anything else than her family, and suddenly Andre's off at war, her dad's dead, the peasants are revolting, and she has to leave. Like it's so intense, that part, and I think that had to happen for her to be able to feel love, like for her to be able to experience that romantic love or a sort of appreciation for herself. I feel like she was so down on herself beforehand that even when was it Kuragin that was nearly proposed to, actually? Was it Anatole at the very beginning when they bring someone to her house?
I think he saw her as an option for money issues.
Yeah, and then she witnessed him flirting with the French lady.
That's possible. Oh gosh, that was very early in the novel.
Yeah, it's hard to remember from the beginning of March.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I felt like it was kind of she sacrificed and lost in the same way the men go out into the world and they become disillusioned with the world. Yeah, and Nikolai and Andre, they all go out to war and realize that the world is not what they thought, and then they come back. She had the same, both Natasha and her had the same thing happen to them, but it happened to them in peacetime. It reminds me of Wolf Hall. Because there is a bit in Wolf Hall where one of the characters says, "Do you think women don't fight? The birthing bed is our battlefield." And there's something about like losing blood and dying just as much as men do. And I feel like that was true in this book. For men, the battlefield and the going out into the world was where they like discover things about themselves and life and stuff. But for the women, they equally tragic things happen to them, and like Natasha loses Andre because she is swayed by the first man who's like introduced her to the concept of sex. Like she's swayed and leaves the sanctity of her, like she doesn't know anything, so obviously she thinks, oh yeah, he's telling me the truth, he's honest, like she's never been anywhere, and that something happens to her as well. And then of course she loses, and then of course Andre comes back, but he's dying, and then Piotr dies. Like there's a lot of loss in her life as well, and her father, he dies as well. There's a lot. And it's same with Maria. Both of them lose their whole world and their whole concept of the world, and tragedy happens to them, and that changes their outlook on life as well.
I like those moments as well in the war bits with the men when they I think with Andre it's when he is visited or like he's lying for death and Napoleon finds him, where they have the moment where they stop glorifying the idea of war. And the way you said it, it happened to the women as well, but in a very different setting.
Yeah.
I like those ones as well. And I think the Rostov family, I think they're my favorite. I think most of my favorite scenes are in their home. Yeah. And I think I was moved with the whole Natasha thing when she was grieving for what she had lost. So I like that part. Or liked it, that moved me.
The part where she was the part where she lost her possibility of a marriage with Andre, or the part where Andre actually dies?
And no, where she lost the possibility. I think Andre's death, I can, maybe it was just the moment when I read it, but it felt very overwritten to me somehow, in a way that I felt a lot of distance because of that. But maybe that was just that I was really done with the book at that point.
I think I struggled with a lot of the deaths, and also towards the end, and Pierre's like realization about life. And in the same way that I struggle with a lot of classics, it happens with a lot of classics, as a non-religious person, because there's so much of it becoming about God. Like a lot of the time, these people realize stuff and it's about God, or the death scenes are all about God. It's similar with Little Women. And so I find myself becoming disconnected because it's not about the human anymore. It's like this transcendence. And for me, it's not something that I connect with, which I understand that obviously back then were more religious. So it's more like, I can understand why it would be the way that someone understood things. But for me, it just, I always lose it then when Andre's like, I understand that it's all about God's love and God loves everyone. And I'm just like, okay. But you've got a hole in your stomach, so
yeah.
I think because I was raised Catholic, so a lot of the time, like I'll be reading it and it kind of washes over me, and then afterwards I'm like, I don't read stuff like that in modern stuff anymore. But I don't know. It all comes rushing back to you when you read a classic.
I was going to talk about Pyotr Rostov and his death. I can't find the bit in the book that I was looking for. But he's lying in a wagon because he's got very excited, the same way that Rostov got excited, like 1,000 pages before. I got excited and was like, oh, I'm going to ride to the emperor and I'm going to give him a letter and it's going to be really exciting. And all that happened for him was that he saw the emperor and was like, oh no, he's like doing a wave or something and I can't go over there. It's like, and then so he had to leave. But Pyotr is like lying in this wagon and he's come up to Dolokhov and Denisov and he's lying in this wagon and he's like thinking of music and it's connecting him to Natasha and home and like he's thinking about being in a fairyland and he so hasn't overcome his romance of war. He never gets to overcome his romance of war because as soon as he rides into battle he's shot. Like he's stuck in that romantic thing, and I think a lot of the book is about the pointlessness of war. There's a lot of like talk about cannon fodder. Like there's the moment Andre sees all of his men jumping into a stream and they're naked and he's like, this is just flesh for like this is all going to die. And then that image is brought back to him again when he is on the battlefield and he sees like bits of flesh everywhere and he's like remembers the naked men. I think there's a lot in this book about the futility of war and the waste of it, the waste, the loss of lives of these men. And I think obviously that comes home when it's a boy, a small boy who's run off again without his parents' permission in the belief of this sort of valiant idea of what will happen, and he's only played at war at home. But I did find that bit, similarly to you were saying about Andre's death being overwritten, it felt so cliche. And sometimes when I'm reading a classic, I wonder, is it cliche because this is where the cliche comes from?
Yeah.
Like, was it always a cliche? But then I'm like, yeah, but Henry V, like Shakespeare, I feel like it is a cliche now. Like, I feel like that was like 200 years before this, it was still happening. So I don't know. What did you guys think?
It came a little bit out of nowhere for me. I kind of forgot he existed. And I liked him when he was on the page. But I didn't really see the point of his storyline that much. Maybe like in a way that those cycles never end. But I don't know. It lost me at that far in the book. I think I just stopped caring, to be quite honest.
No, what this has put me down a brainwave on, which I think I thought about it whilst I was reading it, which is, so this came out starting in 1867 and then it was in full in 1869. I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about Les Mis came out 1861, 62, something like that. And you're reading all of this about like futility of war and the destruction of war. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, what's happening like 50 years from now?
I thought that too.
What's happening 80 years from now? And what would Tolstoy, what would Victor Hugo, what would they think of that?
Yeah, I thought that too, because I thought that like all this about the futility of war, does it feel like a cliche now because of the world wars and all the literature around the world wars? That's why.
But like
that's possible, yeah.
I just think it's interesting because both of these books, both these epics from the 1860s are focusing on Napoleon as like this is the big like war to end all wars kind of thing. This is what we kind of don't want to return to. And obviously fighting is always ongoing in history, so you know, but this is the thing that is like very central in a lot of people's minds. And then suddenly you've got something that comes along just a few decades later that just completely obliterates that notion. And and it's the same kind of thing of like, what a waste.
Yeah.
Really sad.
I do think the philosophy.
about it, but
I do think the philosophy is very different in how we talk about the world wars, because I think the world wars were really talking about alternatives to wars, especially the literature, and like very active pacifism. And I don't feel like Tolstoy did that with War and Peace. Like, he may have shown what it does on a personal level, war, but I felt like even though it was so much history, I felt a certain lack of politics in a way that you do see in literature on the First World War. I did kind of miss the maybe the grittiness, the trauma. Um, yeah, I don't know. It felt maybe surface level if you would compare it to the literature that we have on the world wars.
It's interesting. I definitely felt there was some politics in here, not necessarily always with the war, but there's a lot of talk about serfdom, and it's
Yeah,
interesting.
that's true.
Were emancipated in 1862, so I guess he's writing right about just after the emancipation of the serfs in Tsarist Russia, and so we've got Pierre, who wants to emancipate his serfs, and Andre, who says, "Oh my God, what does Andre says? Something that made me want to guillotine him." Like,
Yeah, but also the
um,
way he wrote it with Pierre, despicable. He was like, "Do you want to be free?" And then he's, "No, I love having you as a master, and I
Yeah.
love it that you own my children as well. Okay, bye."
Yeah, but it was earlier on. He was like, Pierre tried to free them, but he didn't know what he was doing. It was interesting. So they just fooled him. But
Classic
yeah,
Pierre. He didn't know what he was doing.
Andre says, if they're beaten, whipped, and sent to Siberia, I don't think that makes it any worse for them. In Siberia, he'll go on with his brutish life, and the welts on his body will heal, and he'll be as happy as he was before. Like, as if the serfs just, it doesn't bother them. But I do wonder if it's like, it's not Tolstoy saying this, it's Andre and Pierre and things like that saying this, because there's also a moment like very early on at the war where it's made clear to us that the generals are not good on either side, because the Russian generals say something about, I bet there's some nice Italian girls in that nunnery and they're probably very young too, like as if they're going to go and commit like rape during war. And so like, I think there are elements of like an undercurrent of politics that's not so blatant and obvious as it is in First World War fiction, but I think it's there.
Yeah.
It's just a bit more underplayed. I mean, obviously the politics a lot about like the great men of history and stuff and how that's stupid. So there is that element of his, but that is more philosophical than it is practical. But I think also he's writing a very different time. Like First World War fiction is writing during the Russian Revolution and during like rise of communism around the world and stuff. So there's a more like agitated political moment. Whereas in 1860 they've had the emancipation of the serfs, but places aren't like killing their kings or anything at that time. I don't think, at least not in Europe. It's a different political period than the First World War. The First World War is different. Because it's even 1860, like colonialism isn't even as strong as it is by 1914. Like the scramble for Africa hasn't happened and stuff like that. So it's a very different time period to be writing in. So what did you think of the writing and the translation that we read? I think, Charlotte, you read 2 different translations.
Yeah, I had a different one for reading than I did for listening. But I was able to like hop between the two just fine. And it's weird as like, sorry?
I just heard a motorbike. I'm sorry.
That's outside for me.
Right.
So I was reading. Where's my translation note gone? Richard Pevia and Melissa Volokonsky.
Yeah.
In this one. I didn't actually look up what the.
I'm guessing it's the Maud. I think the Maud is the only one that has audio.
Yeah, I read the Maud one, physically and audio, which I have no particular feelings. Like
Mhm.
sometimes you just feel fine about a translation, and you're like, it wasn't in a way of me enjoying this or reading this, and I also don't feel like it was particularly amazing. I don't know. I have very little to say on the translation, except I think if you have nothing to say on a translation, it's usually a good one.
Mhm.
So
I enjoyed the writing in the Piva and Volokhonsky translation, and so I don't know. It's so hard to say, is that Tolstoy or is that Piva and Volokhonsky? Obviously, it's a combination of the two, but I really enjoyed it. Like, women's voices were heard, interrupting each other and merging with the rustling of skirts and the moving of chairs. That sort of conversation began, which is designed to last just long enough so that one can get up at the first pause with a rustling of skirts, say, Je suis bien charmée, le senti du maman, et le comtesse, I can't read that word, and again with the rustling of skirts, go back to the front hall, put on a fur cloak and drive off. And I just like the way that it's written. I think there's a kind of humour to it, particularly the peace moments. I feel like Jane Austen doesn't take anyone seriously. Everyone is being sort of gently mocked at all times. Even like there was a moment where he says like something about doctors, and he's like, he was sick, and he was like, despite the fact that the doctors treated him and let his blood, he still survived. And I was like, that's kind of the tone of the whole book, is this kind of light humour, except when he's moralizing about Napoleon, which is less funny.
Yes, that were. I think I had the same issues with Anna Karenina. Anytime Tolstoy goes on some philosophy thing, I'm like, no, just please don't.
That's the issue I had with the second epilogue as well. It's like I enjoyed, like, when it's just a little bit, it's all right, but he says the same thing over and over again, and also it's like the novel bit, and then the history bit, and then the philosophy bit is way down here. Like, I don't care when he starts talking about. I posted something on my stories about like Tolstoy. I don't understand what you're saying. What you're saying about the movement of people, I don't. You've gone into like metaphysics, and I don't understand. I don't know what's going on.
I understood bits, and then I was like, wait, he's saying the same thing again. And now he's saying it again, but in different words, and with the most absurd metaphors. There was a whole page on an arm, and
yes, moving your arm in the air or something.
I know, and I was like, yeah, but you already told me that, like on the last page. I don't need 3 metaphors to prove the same point.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that, especially with the last epilogue, that there was a bit where he did this metaphor, and then the next bit he did a different metaphor, and I was like, he was saying the same thing. It's the same thing. Which is now me saying the same thing as yeah. What about you, Charlotte? Did you enjoy the philosophizing?
I mean, this is bringing back to my upbringing of being raised Catholic. I am very used to going to church every Sunday and somebody sermonizing, and me just kind of being sat there like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what the point of this is, but I'm sure you will get to one eventually. So I feel like if I'm finding it a bit much, that's yeah. And what I'm thinking about this though is that when I did do my reread of Les Mis, which is also famous for doing very long essays in the middle of the plot, I actually enjoyed them a lot more the second time round because I could see the wood for the trees. I knew where this was eventually leading to. So I do wonder if on a reread, maybe not the epilogue, maybe not the second one, but maybe it's in the middle. maybe the ones in the middle where we're just ranting about war and mankind. Maybe they'll make more sense to me on a second go through, but I also don't know if I actually want to.
Is that what it reminded you of, like sermons? Yeah. Because I've never listened to a sermon. Is that kind of what it's like?
Depending on the proof that you get. Some are much better than others.
So maybe Tolstoy, for like his interpretation, he was preaching.
I can see that.
Which I wouldn't be surprised, because he seems like the type.
you will just get like it'll start a sermon that starts off one way, like giving a little background, a little story from their life or something that they've come across, and then it just keeps going and going, and then we're digging a little bit deeper into like some sort of metaphor, and I'm like, and then we bring out a bit of the theology, like something from one of the readings, and then finally we'll get to the end, and it will all have come together, but the journey was just a lot, and I couldn't work it out, and then suddenly it's over, and then you're back into the next bit of the mass, and you're just like,
It feels like what reading War and Peace is like.
I didn't get it, and that's how I felt. That's how I felt through this.
It reminded me, as someone who doesn't have a huge experience of preaching, like reminded me of reading philosophy, of reading like what are it, Lucretius or Epicurus or something, where it's the same thing. It's just like they say one thing and then they repeat it again in different words, and then they use a metaphor and repeat it again. Like that's just how philosophy always is. It's so boring. I cannot stand reading philosophy. And I feel like it had some of that vibe. I found the bit that I put on my stories, which was like, for human reason, absolute continuity of movement is incomprehensible. Man begins to understand the laws of any kind of movement only when he examines the arbitrary chosen units of the movement. What? I don't. What's he saying?
I have no idea. I cannot believe you are exposing us to the second epilogue again.
No, that's not the second epilogue. That's chapter 1 and part 4.
Not even. Oh.
And then compare that to the bit where I also highlighted in the book, where he says, "Snort, snort," snorted Prince Nikolai Andreevich. Where's his writing? Where he says, and then it is even possible that he did not, because generally he thought very little.
I think Tolstoy's writing overall is just fine. I just think there's nothing wrong with it. It just he should maybe like less is more would be a tip for Tolstoy. Which
that's just a Victorian novel, isn't it?
What's he being paid by the word like Dickens?
Yeah, Dickens.
Yeah, but Dickens got paid by the chapter, so it made sense that he like came
also,
up.
Yeah, Dickens would just go on random weird diversions that it wasn't philosophy, it wasn't like about war, it would be like, and I followed this man down an alleyway and I ended up in a shop, and like
when you're reading Dickens, it's like he didn't know where his story was going, but he had a deadline, so he invented a new character.
But I think this one was episodic as well, wasn't it? Or am I making that up?
I have no idea. I didn't know if he published.
Yeah. It was first published serially and then published in its entirety in 1869.
That makes sense then.
Yeah, so he were also, I guess, so that means that some parts of it were just published as like him opining on Napoleon, like they were published outside. I bet what happened was he was like, "Oh, I don't know what's going next in the plot. Here's a bit like history I wrote before. I'm going to publish that this time."
Dickens and Tolstoy, you know what they should have done when they bundled it? They should have put out the chapters that they were like, "Yeah, that was a bad week. Like, let's edit it out."
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine there was like a coming next week. We will finally return to the plot.
Yeah.
If they were streaming service right now, so many people would unsubscribe. Although I didn't have that feeling with Anna Karenina that I felt like it was too much, or that there were bits in the
tighter.
Yeah.
Quite as much, yeah.
I mean, apart from the 4 chapters of scything one field.
Yeah, but that was just a little bit of relaxing in between, like a lot of drama. I didn't mind it.
Yeah. I mean, that was the most political part.
I don't recall this, but when I read that I would read it surreptitiously at work. So maybe I just blocked that out. So I'm now going on a deep dive to see if Les Mis was serially published, because I'm not finding it. It must have been. It's such a stupidly long book.
That's the only way you get stupidly long books in the past.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But then
What
Victor
do you
Hugo is known for saying that he's going to deliver a manuscript, and then he just keeps on plodding along with it and taking royalty checks and cashing them and just never delivering a book. That's the story of Hunchback of Notre Dame.
So is the 19th century George R.R. Martin?
Yeah.
I wanted to mention him. Can you imagine how much Game of Thrones he would have if that was his contract for the last 10 years?
He had to publish every week or something.
Oh my gosh, that would have been pretty awesome, to be honest.
I'm not seeing anything, so maybe he did just deliver
Publish
the whole
correct
thing.
for some reason.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm just looking through my annotations to see if there was anything of interest to me, like that I wanted to talk about. And it's come up with Maria again, and I think we should talk about Tolstoy's women for a bit, because we haven't got onto that yet.
That's great.
The quote that's like introduced me to it is the thought of self-sacrifice was her favourite thought, but in this case she could not understand to whom and what she must sacrifice.
Oh god.
I know the whole book's about sacrifice, and all these men are sacrificing by going off to war, but they get to be heroes, and she's just like, I've got to hold my tongue while my dad calls me all sorts of things.
Okay, so I have 2 minutes until I have to go do my drops. So how much ranting can we get done in 2 minutes? Do we think?
You can do your rant. Milena will rant while you're gone.
I'm just okay. So my main feelings of this do pop up with Natasha, because we have such an amazing, like, dynamic character, like, just so full of life, so bubbly. She loves music, she loves dancing, singing, and then we get to our favorite epilogue, and she gets married and she has children, and apparently this tames her, and she doesn't want to dance anymore, she doesn't want to sing anymore or play music, and she doesn't even want to interact with people outside her immediate family circle, because that's all she needs. What? How?
All Natasha's outbursts had come from her want of children and a husband.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I understand as a single, unmarried, not with children woman. Maybe I have a bias, but also, I got so cross. I got so cross.
Me too. I was like, everyone had said that the second epilogue, you're going to hate what he does with Natasha, and I thought it was just going to be like, oh, she gets married and she has babies, and she, like, I didn't realize how seriously he was going to take the fact that, like, no, you cannot have personality or interests if you're a mother.
Oh, I think what really stuck the knife in, the bit where he's like, Natasha had heard about women's rights, and she thought, nah, I don't need that. Ridiculous. I understand it's 1860 and he's writing about 1820, and I understand the conversation is nowhere near what it's going to be. But
also, there were women who were like that. There were women who said, I don't need the vote, my husband can vote for me. That is a thing that was...
Queen Victoria is right there.
Yeah.
As an example. Okay, my drops time. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
I will...
Yeah. I think I would have been less annoyed about the whole, like, she becomes obsessed with her family and she loves her family and she really loves being a mum. I would have been less annoyed about that. She wasn't like, and she gave up singing and music and everything for her family. And she, like, gave up singing because it was so powerfully seductive. Like, everything that she liked and everything she was just to attract a man. And now that she's caught a man, she doesn't need to do anything. It's like...
what I kind of think happened, because I know that Natasha is based on his own wife, and his own wife was in bad health and had a lot of children and was pretty much tied to him and their home. So what I kind of think is he based it on her, and I think my guess is that she was just really fucking, sorry if that's not okay, she was really depressed in that time, and that he viewed that and romanticized it, and that is what he wrote down. So I think it's quite realistic what he wrote, but he wrote it really badly.
Yeah.
I think my problem with Natasha, like, I found it quite realistic because I can imagine that happens. with all the hormones going on and everything. I had a harder time with her being so incredibly sexualized earlier in the novel when she was 16.
Yeah.
And like for me, she was never allowed to flourish as a woman or a person without having all these men thirsting over her, wanting her to be their possession, basically. Anatole being the worst. Maybe Pierre is even worse.
Yeah, I actually don't think, like, I think Anatole is a fuckboy, but like I feel like at least he's kind of upfront with what he's like doing. Like he's aware of it to himself that he's just
That's true.
having fun, and he doesn't really like, he just thinks it's fun. And he's like, she'll be fine, she'll be grand. But whereas Pierre is like, she is my perfect angel and I want to capture her and keep her in a cage. Like
Yeah.
he's not so much aware of her as a person. He's like, she is the ideal of this. I think that she was interesting as a character, and I think that her being sexualized by other people I could forgive, because I could see it as like of the time, like she would have been, like the men's thoughts about her was not her as a character, it was just the way that the world was set up around her, because I can still see her being like not powerful, but like she had a lot more like agency and like ideas and things she wanted to do, she just wasn't allowed to. And again, I can see that as like true to the time period. She had sort of feelings and emotions, and then I think that in the epilogue, as Charlotte said, like she doesn't care about women's rights and she doesn't care about anything but her children. Like her own life, her own verve is taken away from her. She is just, he's like, no, but this is what she really needed, this made her better. Before she wasn't good. And I think that wasn't so true beforehand. Sorry. That was like, before it was more like men are seeing her this way, but she is a young girl kind of coming into her understanding of the world, and like her dreams are being shattered in the same way as the other people's, but she's not. But then in the second half, it's like, yes, her dreams are shattered, and the way she comes to peace is just like by not doing any of the things she did before. None of the things she loved brings her joy anymore. And I think the idea that she was depressed is an interesting one. Not the way that, especially the way she gets so like possessive about Pierre and so upset when he leaves for any time period. It does suggest that she's not happy, despite the fact that Tolstoy seems to think that she is. I feel like there's room to read as her being trapped. I don't think Tolstoy intended it, but I think that you can see it that way from her character. I also thought he does think she's very stupid, doesn't he? Like the way that he writes about her, he says like her argument was of course weak, or of course she didn't understand any of it. And I was like, oh, she's very stupid. And I was like, because I was already annoyed at this point. I was like, I think women are stupid. He's saying women are stupid. But then later he's like, no, Maria is very intelligent and Nikolai is stupid. So it's not that women are stupid, it's that Rostovs are stupid. Rostovs are not intelligent.
Well, I do think that like in the core, Tolstoy is convinced that men are superior over women. That is very clear. Just looking at the page time he gives each. But yeah, I do also think that he is a little bit of a snob in looking at intelligence and not intelligence. But I think the romanticizing of the Rostov family kind of fits in with them being very gullible spouses.
Yeah. And even if we think about like their dad, he was always being conned by people for money. He was very similar to Pierre, actually. Which,
that's true.
Is interesting. So maybe that's their future. They're going to end up with no money because Pierre's just going to piss it up a wall like their dad did. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting because you can read it as what did Tolstoy think of women, or you can read it as how can we read into this the lives of women and the feelings of women at the time period. Because I feel like it's obviously different than Austen, which is written by a woman and so has a different perspective on the interior lives of women, because she is a woman and she also would talk to women in a more intimate way than Tolstoy necessarily would. Like not more than one woman. He probably only talks to his wife that way. Like it's a very like closed off society in terms of gender, like even to the extent that when they're at dinner parties, the men are at one end of the table and the women are at another end of the table. Like, there's a very sex segregated society. But yeah, so I think that throughout the rest of the book there is a possibility to read into Maria and Natasha more than is on the page. Like, you're right, they're not given time or space, but we can see more to them than necessarily Tolstoy was intending, or I don't know, because we can't know what he was intending. But I think you are right. There's definitely elements of, I mean, he doesn't care about the working classes at all. I think that is very clear. But I mean, again, neither did Jane Austen. So
no, I think looking at his other works as well, he found them interesting, but I don't think he cared for a single individual. Which I think is a big difference.
It's not in the way Dickens cared about the working classes. I think you can tell his work, and Tolstoy did not. Yeah, it's.
But I also think Russian and British society was really quite different.
Especially at this time period.
Yeah. She's back.
We're back. We've moved on to talking about Marxism.
Oh, fun.
I'm joking, but we were talking about class in the book. And also Tolstoy's authorial intent and how much you can read into the characters that he didn't intend. Like how there's more to the women than Tolstoy seems to realise. Yes, okay. Is there anything we haven't covered that you think you wanted to talk about?
For me, it was Natasha, but you mentioned her, so we talked about her quite a lot.
Yeah, she was my favourite, I think. But I always love a reckless character. I wish that Andre had been less of a prick and just forgiven her right away, because he's like, well, I want to marry a child, so sometimes she's going to do childish things. Yeah, should have been his response.
I felt I kept on going back and forth on Pierre because I felt so much sympathy for him at the beginning of the book, and then you get like the proper fallout of his marriage with Helene, where you're just like, where he's actually saying that he wants to kill her, and he's like,
yes,
very quickly is like, oh no, that's not a thing I want to do, because I think I'm actually a good person. But he goes back and forth a lot of times in a way that you're like, okay. But it's a lot of the time it's that Pierre is like the least bad of some of the men. And I'm like, is that a thing that I want to be like, good job, you're not the worst? And as I said during the live, the fact that I was picturing Josh Groban playing him probably did a lot to make me sympathise with him. But yeah, and then we get to the epilogue where like the marriage between him and Natasha means that Natasha becomes devoid of all personality, which then makes me feel like, yeah, what are you doing? What are you doing to this woman?
Well, he's happy with lost all personality because his last wife had a great deal of personality.
Yes.
I forgot about Ellen actually, because she dies, and also because she's not in it for a long time. I forgot that she existed. She is a really
dies as well. She's like, magic. You don't have to worry about her anymore. She's now dead.
Well, she first tries to connive to divorce him in 2 different religions, which I thought was hysterical.
Me too. That was so interesting. I was like Googling, was this possible? I wanted to know if she could succeed. I thought this is revolutionary. And then Tolstoy was like, oh, by the way, she died. Okay, let's move on.
Oh, and also, I didn't get a chance to watch the full BBC, but I did watch the first episode in prep for today. And I think I completely missed the hints, because it's not in the book, but apparently it's not like explicit in the book, because of course it wouldn't be, but something that apparently that is drawn out in the BBC is a bit of incest going on.
That's what I said last time we did a show,
which I hadn't picked up on in the book, but apparently is there, and they really draw it out in the show. So I'm like,
one throwaway line in the book.
Wait, between which characters?
Between Ellen and Anatole. Like, in the first episode of the show, like he fully, like, they don't show much, but they imply much. He just like fully gets into bed with her when she is like naked, and and it's kind of implied that he's like doing a bit of touching, and that was like, oh, okay, cool.
There is a line in the book, something about
You're going
like
a little story here, okay?
There's a little bit in the book that's like there's a rumor about the two being inappropriately close or something.
I missed that as well, but it's not surprising because like Tolstoy went out of his way to villainize those two. So adding incest into mix.
If she's going to be bad, then we're going to make her the very, very worst, and therefore you are not meant to care that she dies.
And also, sex is bad. Sex is very bad and shouldn't be done for any reason except for children. Like, I feel like any sort of vague attempt at desire in this book always ends badly. Because Pierre desired Helen because she's like gorgeous. And Anatole and Natasha's obviously a whole desiring thing, and Andre talks about how like his desire for Natasha was part of his downfall. So desire is clearly considered to be very bad. You should only perfectly purely and platonically love your own wife, and she should be kissing her sister-in-law. That should be what's going on.
Oh, wait, that was super gay, right?
I mean, I think that it wasn't intended to be gay, but it did.
No, but like,
they stay up in bed all night together, Maria and Natasha. At the end of the
I know. I was like, oh, they were roommates for life. That was.
There was another. I think it was earlier in the book where I was reading it and was like, "Is that meant to be gay?" It wasn't. I can't remember. Was it Pierre and Andre? Like just the strength of their friendship, and I was just like, okay. Are we hinting here? I can't tell.
I mean, we are just assuming that Tolstoy didn't mean to, but we don't know everything about him. I mean, pretending that being gay is something that is new is of course ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we don't know what he did when he was younger.
Well, there's a lot of homoeroticism in the whole war bit anyway. I feel like there's a lot of this like loving your fellow war people you're with and stuff. It's very there's some vibe. He definitely likes men more than he likes women, so
yeah. I mean, he was in the war himself, so I'm sure he has seen plenty.
Yeah, definitely. And if Natasha's based on his wife, maybe she was sleeping in a bed with a woman most of the time. So.
And he just thought they were friends.
I would love that. There should be a gay rewrite of War and Peace.
I bet there's fan fiction somewhere out there.
Yeah, definitely.
My only other thing was in order to like really show the mirror between the war and the peace sections, and how there are lots of things that you have, you've got your conflict obviously in the war, but that does not mean that in the peace sections that is devoid of conflict. I think a mirror for that between the peace sections and war is that war is just as every bit as petty as peace. I think that really comes through in the long descriptions about Napoleon, and we hate him. May I count the ways?
I actually really enjoyed that when he was roasting Napoleon.
Yeah, he was not very clearly not a fan, but it was quite funny.
Yeah.
I think also when I finished War and Peace, I then moved on to reading Uproar by Alice Luxton, which is non-fiction. It's about the satire and prints of the 18th century and early 19th century, and she does discuss like the popular conception of Napoleon as being like this short man who is very pathetic and weedy and like nobody likes him, and we're going to make in these print and that a lot of our perception of him is because of these prints which are depicting him as being short, even though he was an average height for a man, and just generally trying to make him look as ridiculous as possible. And then I'm reading this, and I'm like, how much of Tolstoy's opinion and his view of Napoleon is coming from things like that, from the popular culture that he's seeing. That is just like, look at this ridiculous man. Look at him.
He was in a dark blue uniform, open over a white waistcoat, which went down over his round stomach. White buckskin stretched tight over the fat haunches of his short legs and jack boots.
Yes.
His short hair had obviously been just brushed, but one strand hung loose over the middle of his wide forehead. His plump white neck stood out sharply against the black collar of his uniform. He smelled of strong cologne. His full, youthful face with its bulging chin bore an expression of majestic imperial greeting.
Is that what it look like?
No, I think it's more like this.
Oh, okay.
It's one of my favorite quotes, although it's a bit different in my translation.
Yeah.
The words are a bit more old, I think.
Right.
There's a really weird word for stomach. I don't even remember, but yeah, it's really funny.
Yeah. Oh.
I didn't realize until I had to take these, because I've never had to use eye drops before, but I didn't realize until I was actually doing them that that once you've applied them, you have to hold like that, because otherwise they will just drop into your mouth.
Oh
no!
I didn't realize this, and so I keep on getting the taste of these disgusting medicated eye drops in my mouth, and it's horrible.
Good.
It makes me very grateful that I've gone down. Sorry, side tangent on this. The first 2 days, you have to take them every 2 hours, aside from when you're sleeping. And now we're at every 4 hours. But it would mean like you'd get the taste out of your mouth, and then suddenly my thing is buzzing, being like, "You need to take them again." It's horrible.
Oh no! Oh, I feel sorry for you.
I've just been reading through my notes again, and there's a point where it said, where is it? They feared, boasted, rejoiced, resented, reasoned, supposing that they knew what they were doing and that they were doing it for themselves, and yet they were all involuntary instruments of history and performed work hidden from them but comprehensible to us. Such is the inevitable fate of all men of action. The higher they stand in the human hierarchy, the less free they are. And my note is just, except for the actual slaves, Lev.
He's trying to be like cool on Pierre and his sirs, but then
The higher up you are, the less free you are. You live in a slave society.
That is like a little bit like the premise of The Crown.
Yeah.
Like, please feel sorry for these very powerful people.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like a nice place to be, but you know, who's got the power to get out of it? They do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I don't think I have anything left in my notes or anything.
I did think of something when you were, but then we moved on to Charlotte's eye drops, and it's
sorry. It's consumed my week. My eyes have consumed my week, and yeah. I also had to go out and buy all new eye makeup, which, considering my taste in eye makeup, set me back a pretty penny.
Okay.
That's expensive, yes.
Tiniest violin for me.
What about the actual slaves, Charlotte?
I know.
Okay, I think we are all finished now. Then, if there's nothing else anyone wants to add, if anyone watching have anything they want to add, can respond to. You've all been very quiet today.
Yeah, Kieran is clearly not in this life.
No, otherwise we'd have been spammed.
I was going to say when you were talking about possession, I was like, if nothing else, you were going to get a great conversation.
I actually think Kieran will like it, if I'm being honest. Which isn't, I don't think I've ever said that before.
Well, I feel like I've been turning into Kieran recently because I've been hating everything I've read. So
I actually didn't like Possession, but that was a very me thing.
Interesting.
I've not read it. If I had, I would predict that my opinion would be the exact opposite of what Kieran's would be, because we tend to have completely different opinions. Everything aside from Wolf Hall, and not liking The Road. Otherwise, completely different taste in books.
Yeah, I think we we often dislike the same things, but we never seem to like the same things. Like he didn't like The Promise. What's wrong with him? The Booker Prize winner. Naming Galgut, yeah. Anyway, we should stop talking about Kieran because we'll give him an ego.
What do you think you will?
If you say his name enough times, you will summon him.
I think I'm going to like this. I'm looking forward to it. Although, so there's a bit of historical element to it, right? But I'm not usually a fan of dual timelines, so that's something that could.
It's not really like that.
Okay. But yeah, I'm interested. My mum loves AS5, so I'm interested to see.
It's more research than a dual timeline.
Okay, and it's poetry as well, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of chapters begin with some poetry because, of course, a lot of the characters are poets. So.
Me too. I'm a poet, so hopefully I will enjoy it.
How many pages is this one?
This one is much shorter. So
it's still thick, though.
It is 606. It's half the length of War and Peace, which was 1217, I think. So yeah, this should be much easier to read. So Charlotte, you can read it and join us at the end of June.
Well, my next book club is my in real life one that I do with my musical theatre society, and we've got an over 500-page book that time around, which is Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, which I've never read.
Oh, that was quite lovely. I read it a while back.
Good things coming? Good things coming then for me?
I think you're going to be very critical on it, because even I was critical on it, on some historical aspects, but it's definitely like cozy and heartwarming at parts. But also heartbreaking. Just the vibes are there.
So yeah, we're reading Possession in May and June. We're reading The Shock Doctrine in July and August, which is by Naomi Klein. It is non-fiction and a Sunny Book Nook. Sunny from a Sunny Book Nook will be co-hosting that one. Kieran's doing Possession. In September, October, we're reading Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. And if you have anyone that you think would like to read a translated horror book with me, please do let me know. And then in November, December, we're reading Babel by R.F. Kuang, and Doz is going to join me for that one. So
I keep on being told to read that one, so I might join you on that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what we're reading next, and we will see you at the end of June with Kieran, who should be here by now. We've said his name enough, and please do join us for that. Thank you, Charlotte and Milena, for doing this with me, helping me make sure I read War and Peace, because I don't think I would have read it.
No, and thank you for including us, because this is the book that has been on my TBR the longest. This is the only book on my TBR that is pre the first lockdown, because I got it 2 days. I got it for my birthday, which was 2 days before lockdown was officially called. So it's finally off.
3 years later.
Well done.
I've not read any of these. Far behind. But yeah, so thank you for joining us, and we will see you again very soon. Bye.
Bye.